It was just supposed to be a simple act of kindness on the worst night of the year. A struggling single father opened his door to a freezing mother and her 2 children, expecting absolutely nothing in return. But when the sun finally rose, the woman was gone, leaving behind a secret that would turn his entire world upside down. The coastal stretch of Astoria, Oregon, was notorious for its temperamental weather, but the nor'easter that slammed into the shoreline on that bleak Tuesday in November was something else entirely. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the thin window panes of Weston Gallagher's modest, single-story home. Weston, a 32-year-old mechanic who worked 70 hours a week just to keep the lights on, sat at his cramped kitchen table, staring blankly at a pile of past-due notices. Red ink glared back at him. Final notice. Foreclosure pending. Ever since his wife passed away 3 years ago from a sudden, aggressive illness, Weston had been drowning. The medical bills had decimated their savings, and living on a single income while raising his 6-year-old son, Leo, had turned his life into a relentless, exhausting treadmill. "Dad, the lights are doing it again," Leo's small voice piped up from the living room, where he was huddled under a faded fleece blanket, watching cartoons. Right on cue, the overhead bulb flickered, buzzed, and died. Plunged into sudden darkness, the house felt even colder. "Don't worry, buddy," Weston said, forcing a calm cheerfulness into his voice that he absolutely didn't feel. He fumbled in the dark drawer for a flashlight, clicking it on to cast a pale yellow beam across the room. "Just a little power outage. Good thing we have extra batteries." As he walked over to comfort his son, a sudden, sharp sound cut through the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Thump, thump, thump. Weston froze. He lived at the end of a dead-end dirt road, a good 3 miles from the main highway. No one ever came out this way, especially not in the middle of a torrential storm that had already prompted flash flood warnings across the county. Thump, thump, thump. It was frantic, desperate. Weston's protective instincts flared. He grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker from the hearth, gripping it tight, and instructed Leo to stay put on the couch. Cautiously, Weston approached the front door. He peered through the frosted side panel window, but the rain was sheeting down too hard to make out anything more than a dark silhouette. Hand trembling slightly, he unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a crack, keeping the chain engaged. Standing on his porch, illuminated only by the harsh, strobing flashes of lightning, was a woman. She was drenched to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her pale face. But she wasn't alone. Clinging to her legs, shivering uncontrollably in the freezing downpour, were 2 small children, a girl who looked about 7 and a boy no older than 5. "Please," the woman gasped, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the wind. "Please, my car went off the road about a mile back. The water is rising. We've been walking in the dark. My kids are freezing." Weston hesitated for a fraction of a second. He was a single father with nothing to his name, living in an isolated area. Letting strangers into his house was a massive risk. But then he looked at the children. The little boy's lips were tinted a terrifying shade of blue, and the little girl was sobbing silently into her mother's sodden coat. Weston's heart broke. He imagined Leo out in that storm, and the decision was made for him. "Come in, quickly." Weston unhooked the chain and threw the door wide open. The woman ushered her children inside, the 3 of them leaving muddy puddles on the worn hardwood floor. Now, in the dim light of his flashlight, Weston got a better look at his unexpected guests. The woman's clothes were soaked and ruined, but even through the grime, there was something striking about her. She wore a tailored trench coat that looked far too elegant for a road trip through rural Oregon, and the boots leaving mud on his floor had a distinctly European designer cut. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you so much," the woman breathed, her teeth chattering as she knelt to check her kids. "I'm Josephine. This is Mia and Noah." "I'm Weston. My son, Leo, is in the living room," he replied, already moving. "Let me get you some towels. The power is out, but I can get a fire going in the hearth. We need to get those wet clothes off the kids." For the next 20 minutes, the house was a flurry of chaotic but organized activity. Weston provided oversized flannel shirts and sweatpants for Josephine and the children. He built a roaring fire in the living room fireplace, the orange flames casting a warm, comforting glow over the small space. As the children warmed up, the tension in the room began to thaw. Leo, ever the social butterfly, cautiously approached Mia and Noah, offering them his prized collection of wooden blocks. Within minutes, the three children were sitting on the rug, bathed in firelight, silently building a tower together. Weston brought out 2 mugs of hot cocoa made with a camping stove, handing one to Josephine. She took it with shivering hands, wrapping her long fingers around the warm ceramic. "I can't thank you enough, Weston," Josephine said softly, her eyes locked on her children. "If you hadn't opened the door, I don't know what we would have done. The main road is completely washed out." "You don't need to thank me," Weston said, taking a seat in the worn armchair opposite the couch. "It's a bad night to be out there. Where were you headed?" Josephine hesitated. A subtle shift occurred in her posture, a sudden stiffening, a brief flickering of her eyes toward the window. "North," she said simply. "Just trying to get away for a bit. We took a wrong turn when the GPS lost signal." Weston nodded, sensing she didn't want to pry. But as a mechanic, he was observant. He noticed the way she carried herself, with an innate, almost intimidating posture of command, even while wearing his oversized, faded flannel shirt. He noticed the heavy, masculine-looking luxury watch on her wrist that she hadn't taken off. It looked like a Patek Philippe, worth more than his entire house. But it wasn't his business. They were just travelers caught in a bad situation. Or so he thought. By 8 p.m., the storm outside had intensified, lashing angrily against the roof. But inside, a strange domestic peace had settled over the living room. Weston ventured into the kitchen with his flashlight to scavenge for dinner. He felt a deep pang of embarrassment as he rummaged through the bare cupboards. All he had left until payday was a box of generic macaroni and cheese, a can of tomato soup, and a single pack of hot dogs. It wasn't exactly a meal fit for guests. He cooked it over the camping stove anyway, chopping up the hot dogs into the macaroni just like he did for Leo. When he brought the mismatched bowls into the living room, he apologized. "I'm sorry, it's not much," Weston muttered, handing a bowl to Josephine. "I haven't had a chance to make a grocery run." Josephine took the bowl, looking down at the cheap food. For a second, Weston expected a look of distaste. Instead, a soft, genuine smile touched her lips. "Weston, it's hot and we're safe. To me, this is a Michelin star meal." She ate it with surprising grace, and as the children devoured their portions, the 2 adults fell into a low, quiet conversation. Josephine asked about the house, and Weston, feeling unexpectedly comfortable with this mysterious stranger, found himself opening up. He told her about his late wife, the grueling schedule at the auto shop, and the crushing weight of the medical debt that was slowly suffocating him. He didn't mean to complain. It just spilled out, unlocked by the intimacy of the firelight and the storm. "I have until the end of the month," Weston confessed, his voice barely a whisper so Leo wouldn't hear. "If I can't come up with $12,000 for the bank, they're taking the house. I don't know where Leo and I will go." Josephine listened with an intensity that unsettled him. Her dark eyes bored into his, assessing, absorbing every word. "That's not right," she said quietly. "You work hard. You're a good father. The system shouldn't punish people like you for a tragedy." "It's just the way the world works, Josephine," Weston sighed, running a tired hand over his face. "Sometimes the world needs a push in the right direction," she murmured, almost to herself. As the evening wore on, the children fell asleep on the living room rug, exhausted by the ordeal. Weston fetched his mattress from the bedroom, dragging it into the living room near the fire so Josephine and her kids could sleep comfortably. He insisted on taking the short, lumpy sofa. "You've done too much already," Josephine protested, though her eyelids were heavy with exhaustion. "I insist. Get some rest. The storm will break by morning, and we'll figure out how to get your car towed," Weston said, settling onto the couch and pulling a thin blanket over himself. By midnight, the house was silent, except for the crackling of dying embers and the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping children. Weston, however, couldn't sleep. His mind raced with anxiety about the foreclosure, the bills, and the sheer unpredictability of the evening. Around 2 a.m., a strange noise pulled him from his half-slumber. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. Weston slowly opened his eyes, keeping his breathing steady. Across the room, bathed in the faint, silvery light of the moon breaking through the storm clouds, Josephine was awake. She was sitting up by the window, holding a sleek, black device to her ear. It wasn't a standard smartphone. It looked thicker, heavier, a satellite phone. Weston strained his ears, his heart picking up a nervous rhythm. Cell service had been completely knocked out in the area for hours, yet she was making a crystal-clear call. "I don't care what the board says," Josephine hissed into the phone, her voice dropping an octave, replaced by a razor-sharp tone of absolute authority that sent a chill down Weston's spine. "If Sterling tries to push the merger through while I'm off the grid, you execute the poison pill protocol. Burn it all down if you have to." Weston held his breath. The board? Merger? Poison pill? There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. "No," Josephine snapped quietly. "They engineered that crash tonight. Someone tampered with my car's steering column before we left Portland. They knew I was driving the kids to the cabin. If they think they can leverage my family's safety to force a hostile takeover, they are dead wrong." Weston felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Tampered steering column? Hostile takeover? What had he brought into his home? "I'm safe," Josephine continued, her voice softening slightly as she looked back toward the sleeping children, and then lingering for a moment on Weston's supposedly sleeping form on the couch. "I found shelter with a local. A civilian. He doesn't know anything. Send the private extraction team to my GPS coordinates at exactly 6 a.m., heavily armed. Do not involve local law enforcement. We don't know who is on their payroll." Weston squeezed his eyes shut. Panic flared in his chest like a lit match. Heavily armed extraction team? A civilian? He had thought he was rescuing a stranded suburban mother, but he had just invited a massive, dangerous conspiracy into his living room. Was she a cartel boss? A fugitive billionaire? "Yes," Josephine whispered into the phone, her tone turning glacial. "Once the kids are safe, we destroy them. Prepare the legal team and the federal evidence. Tomorrow morning, I am ending this." She clicked the device off. Weston lay perfectly still on the couch, his heart hammering against his ribs so loudly he was terrified she would hear it. He was a small-town mechanic, drowning in debt, and he was currently sharing a room with a woman who had just ordered a heavily armed tactical team to his front yard. He didn't sleep a single wink for the rest of the night. He lay there, clutching the thin blanket, waiting for the sun to rise, and praying that his act of kindness wouldn't be the thing that got him and his son killed. The agonizing hours crawled by in the dark. Weston lay paralyzed on the lumpy sofa, his mind spinning through 100 catastrophic scenarios. He listened to the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of Leo in the next room and the soft exhales of Mia and Noah on the rug. But his ears were fiercely attuned to the silence outside. The torrential downpour had finally reduced to a steady, miserable drizzle, leaving the Oregon coastline battered and exhausted. At 5:45 a.m., the grey light of dawn began to bleed through the window blinds, casting long, eerie shadows across the living room floor. Weston hadn't moved an inch, but his muscles ached from the sheer tension of remaining perfectly still. Across the room, Josephine stirred. She didn't wake up groggy like a normal, exhausted mother. She sat up with a sharp, terrifying suddenness, as if an internal alarm clock had detonated in her brain. Weston watched through slitted eyelids as she quietly slipped out of the oversized flannel shirt he had loaned her, pulling her damp, ruined designer trench coat back over her shoulders. She smoothed her hair back with a ruthless efficiency, her face hardening into an expression of pure, unadulterated steel. The vulnerable, shivering woman from the night before had completely vanished. At 5:58 a.m., a low, guttural vibration rumbled through the wooden floorboards of Weston's house. It wasn't thunder. It was the synchronized, heavy purr of high-powered engines. Weston sat up, abandoning the pretense of sleep. His heart hammered in his throat as a blinding pair of xenon headlights swept across his living room window, followed by another, and then a third. Josephine turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, Weston." "Who is outside?" Weston demanded, his voice cracking. He instinctively moved to position himself between the front window and the hallway leading to Leo's bedroom. He grabbed the heavy iron fireplace poker he had discarded the night before, his knuckles turning white. "People who work for me," Josephine said calmly. "Put the iron down. You are in no danger here. I promise you." Outside, the engines idled. Weston cautiously peered through the frosted side panel window. 3 massive matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Class SUVs were parked haphazardly in his muddy driveway, their engines growling menacingly. The doors of the lead vehicle swung open, and 4 men stepped out into the lingering rain. They were not local police. They were dressed in black tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and earpieces, moving with lethal, disciplined precision. One of them carried an umbrella. Another held a menacingly short, suppressed automatic weapon held tightly against his chest. "Josephine." "What is this?" Weston whispered, backing away from the door. "Who are you?" "I am someone who was very nearly killed last night, and who would have frozen to death with my children if you hadn't opened your door," she replied, her tone softening just a fraction. She knelt down, gently shaking Mia and Noah awake. "Come on, little ones. Our ride is here. Time to go." The children rubbed their eyes, confused but incredibly obedient, as if they were used to abrupt, chaotic departures. A sharp knock rapped against the front door. "Mom, perimeter is secure," a deep, gruff voice called out from the porch. "I'm coming," Josephine answered. She stood up, taking her children by the hand, and looked back at Weston. For a brief second, the corporate armor cracked, and a look of profound, genuine gratitude washed over her face. She stepped forward and reached out, gently touching Weston's arm. "You gave us sanctuary when you had absolutely nothing to spare," Josephine said quietly, her dark eyes locking onto his. "I know about the foreclosure. I saw the papers on your kitchen counter last night. I know you are drowning, Weston, and I know you gave my children the last of your food." Weston swallowed hard, shame flushing his cheeks. It was just a box of mac and cheese. "It was everything," she corrected him. Do not leave this house today. Keep the doors locked. When the local news breaks this afternoon, do not speak to any reporters. Do you understand?" Yes, I understand." She offered a brief, tight nod. "Goodbye, Weston." Josephine opened the front door. Instantly, the tactical team surrounded her in a tight, protective diamond formation. The man with the umbrella shielded her and the children from the rain, while the others scanned the surrounding woods with intense paranoia. Within 30 seconds, the family was loaded into the armored center SUV. The heavy doors slammed shut with a definitive, vault-like thud. The convoy reversed out of his muddy driveway with shocking speed, tires kicking up wet gravel, and vanished down the rural road. Weston stood alone in his living room, the cold morning air rushing in through the still open front door. His fireplace poker was still clutched in his hand. The only evidence that the night hadn't been a bizarre, feverish hallucination was the lingering scent of expensive European perfume and the 3 empty, mismatched bowls sitting on the coffee table. He locked the deadbolt, slid the chain into place, and sank onto the floor, running his trembling hands through his hair. He had survived. Whoever she was gone. "Dad!" Weston jumped. Leo was standing in the hallway, clutching his stuffed bear, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Where did the lady and the kids go?" Weston let out a long, shuddering breath and forced a smile, walking over to scoop his son into his arms. "They had to leave early, buddy. Their ride came." "Did they say thank you?" Leo asked innocently. "Yeah," Weston whispered, resting his chin on his son's head. "They said thank you." He carried Leo into the kitchen to figure out what they could possibly eat for breakfast, given that he had emptied the pantry last night. But as he set Leo down at the small, scratched wooden table, Weston stopped dead in his tracks. Sitting in the exact center of the table was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It hadn't been there the night before. Weston approached the table as if the envelope were a live explosive. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock. In the top corner, embossed in subtle gold foil, was a corporate logo, Langdon Cross Global Holdings. He swallowed the dry lump in his throat and slid his thumb under the seal, tearing it open. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. One was a sheet torn from his own cheap, spiral-bound kitchen notepad. The other was a stiff, watermarked document that looked incredibly official. Weston unfolded the notebook paper first. The handwriting was sharp, elegant, and hurried, written with a black fountain pen. "Weston, by the time you read this, my board of directors will have initiated an emergency lockdown, and the men who sabotaged my vehicle will be in federal custody. My name is Josephine Langdon. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Langdon Cross Global Holdings, a private equity and logistics conglomerate based in Seattle. Last night, a rival faction within my own company, backed by offshore capital, attempted a hostile takeover. They intended to eliminate me before the morning bell rang on Wall Street. By taking us in, you didn't just save a mother and her children. You prevented the collapse of a company that employs 40,000 people. I do not believe in debts, Weston. I believe in ledgers, and I believe in balancing them. You told me last night that the world doesn't care about a good father drowning in a broken system. You were right. The world doesn't care. But I do. I saw your final notice from Pacific Western Bank. It might interest you to know that Pacific Western is a subsidiary of the very equity firm that tried to have me killed last night. As of 6:15 a.m. this morning, my firm has aggressively acquired a controlling stake in Pacific Western Bank. Your mortgage has been entirely erased from their database. The house is yours, free and clear. The deed will arrive via FedEx on Thursday. However, simply returning you to zero is not an adequate return on the investment you made in me and my children. Enclosed is a certified cashier's draft, drawn from my personal accounts at J.P. Morgan Chase. It is fully cleared and ready for deposit. Use it to pay off your medical debts. Use it to fix that terrible leak in your roof. Use it to ensure Leo never has to worry about the lights going out again. You are a good man, Weston Gallagher. The world needs more of them. Keep this quiet, live well, and know that you always have a friend in Seattle. Sincerely, Josephine Langdon. Weston stopped breathing. The blood roared in his ears like the ocean storm outside. His hands shook violently as he set the letter down and pulled out the second piece of paper. It was a certified cashier's check from J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, N.A. Pay to the order of Weston Gallagher. Weston's eyes moved to the amount box. He blinked, convinced the dim kitchen light was playing tricks on him. He rubbed his eyes, but the numbers didn't change. $2,500,000. $2,500,000 and 0 hundredths. Weston's knees buckled. He collapsed into the wooden kitchen chair, gasping for air as tears finally, mercifully, spilled over his eyelashes. $2.5 million. His house was paid off. His wife's crushing medical debt was gone. He didn't have to work 70 hours a week at the auto shop anymore. He could actually be a father to Leo. He could breathe. "Dad, are you crying?" Leo asked, his small face scrunched up in concern as he patted Weston's arm. Weston let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and pulled his son into a desperate, crushing hug. "Nobody. I'm just really happy. We're going to be okay. We're going to be so okay." Later that afternoon, exactly as Josephine had predicted, the news broke. Weston sat in his living room, the lights still off, watching the battery-powered emergency radio and scrolling through the news on his phone. The headlines of the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg were screaming the same story. Massive shakeup at Langdon Cross Global Holdings. Several board members arrested by FBI for corporate sabotage and attempted murder. CEO Josephine Langdon emerges unscathed, orchestrates brutal counter-takeover of rival firm. There were photos of Josephine attached to the articles. She was walking down the steps of a federal courthouse in Seattle, flanked by men in suits, wearing a razor-sharp blazer and designer sunglasses. She looked invincible. She looked like a billionaire titan of industry who crushed her enemies without breaking a sweat. But looking at the screen, Weston didn't see a ruthless CEO. He saw the shivering, desperate mother sitting on his worn rug, eating generic mac and cheese out of a chipped bowl with a plastic spoon, watching her children build block towers by the fire. He looked down at the cream-colored envelope resting on the coffee table next to the certified check. He had spent the last 3 years believing that the universe was entirely indifferent to his suffering, that karma was a lie, and that bad things happened to good people for no reason at all. But as the storm clouds finally broke over Astoria, revealing the first bright, piercing rays of afternoon sunlight, Weston realized that the universe had a strange way of balancing its own ledgers. He had offered up the very last of what he had, his home, his food, his safety, and in return, a stranger had given him back his life. Sometimes salvation arrives not in the form of angels, but in the guise of stranded strangers on a stormy night. Weston opened his door expecting nothing, only to find that his simple compassion had rewritten his destiny. The cold, dark chapter of his life was permanently closed, replaced by a future brighter than he could have ever imagined, all because he chose kindness when he had nothing left to give.